The shed was a wreck, splintered wood and rusted nails spilling out like a confession nobody wanted to hear. I was elbow-deep in its chaos, sweat stinging my eyes, when Javier's shadow fell over me, sharp and quiet like a secret. "You're gonna break something if you keep hammering like that, Miles," he said, his voice low, teasing, but with an edge that made my pulse trip. My name's Miles Carter, 24, a mechanic from Oakland who'd rather fix a carburetor than a heart. I'd been roped into helping Javier Morales, 26, a graphic designer with a laugh that could thaw winter, rebuild his uncle's shed in a sleepy Sacramento suburb. It was a favor for my sister, who swore Javier was good people and needed help. I didn't expect the way his dark eyes lingered, or how his calloused fingers brushing mine when he handed me a nail felt like a spark in a dry forest. The shed was our battlefield that summer of 2025. Javier's uncle, Mr. Morales, was a gruff widower who'd let the backyard decay since his wife passed. The shed was his latest obsession, a monument to order he thought could fix his grief. Javier, though, saw it as something else, a chance to rebuild more than wood. "He thinks if the shed's perfect, everything else will be," Javier told me that first day, kicking a warped plank. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight I couldn't place. I wasn't out. Not really. Growing up black in a neighborhood where survival meant keeping your head down, I'd learned to bury certain truths. I dated women, played the part, and kept my glances at guys like Javier brief, fleeting, locked away. But Javier? He was open, unapologetic, his pride flag pin glinting on his jacket like a dare. "You ever think about who you're building this for?" he asked me once, his eyes searching mine. I shrugged, dodging. "Your uncle, I guess." He just smiled, like he knew I was lying. That morning, we were wrestling with a stubborn beam. I was tying rope to hoist it, my fingers fumbling, when Javier stepped close, too close. His breath was warm against my neck as he reached to steady the knot. "You're hopeless at this," he murmured, his hand grazing mine. I froze, the rope taut between us, my heart louder than the hammer in my hand. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to lean in. Instead, I muttered, "You're in my way," and he laughed, soft and dangerous. By noon, the heat was brutal, the kind that makes you feel like you're breathing through a straw. We sat under the oak tree, passing a water bottle back and forth. Javier's knee bumped mine, and he didn't move it. "You ever feel like you're hiding from yourself?" he asked, staring at the shed. I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the water. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shot back, sharper than I meant. He didn't flinch. "Means I see you, Miles. You're not just here fixing a shed." I wanted to argue, to shove his words back, but they stuck like splinters. That night, I lay awake in my sister's guest room, replaying the way his fingers had lingered on the rope, the way his eyes held mine like they could see through every wall I'd built. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for him. The next day, we worked in silence, the air thick with something unspoken. Javier was quieter, focused, but every now and then, he'd glance at me, his expression unreadable. I caught myself watching him too, his hands steady on the saw, his shirt clinging to his back in the heat. When he dropped a nail and we both reached for it, our fingers tangled, and for a second, the world stopped. "Sorry," I mumbled, pulling back. He didn't let go right away. "Don't be," he said, his voice barely a whisper. By the third day, the shed was taking shape, but I was falling apart. Every touch, every look, was a question I didn't know how to answer. Javier was relentless, not with words, but with his presence. His laugh, his quiet strength, the way he'd hum old salsa tunes while sanding wood. I was tied up, not just in the ropes we used for the beams, but in something bigger, something I'd spent years running from. That afternoon, a storm rolled in, gray clouds swallowing the sun. We scrambled to cover the shed with a tarp, our hands brushing as we tied it down. Lightning cracked, and Javier grabbed my wrist, pulling me under the oak tree for cover. Rain poured, soaking us, and we stood there, inches apart, his grip firm but gentle. "Miles," he said, his voice cutting through the storm. "Stop running." I opened my mouth to deny it, but nothing came out. His eyes were steady, fearless, and for the first time I didn't look away. The rain blurred the world, but not him, not us. The rain didn't let up, hammering the tarp like it was trying to drown us. Javier's hand was still on my wrist, his thumb tracing a slow circle that sent heat racing up my arm. I wanted to pull away, to rebuild the walls he was tearing down, but my feet wouldn't move. "Miles," he said again, softer now, his dark eyes locked on mine. "You don't have to say anything. Just stay." The vulnerability in his voice hit me harder than the storm. Javier, who always seemed so sure, was asking me to meet him halfway. I didn't know if I could. We stood there, soaked and shivering, until the rain eased to a drizzle. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, and Javier finally let go of my wrist, stepping back. "Come on," he said, nodding toward his uncle's house. "We're no good to the shed like this." I followed, my heart pounding louder than the thunder. Inside, the house was quiet, Mr. Morales out for the day. Javier handed me a towel, his fingers brushing mine again. Deliberate, I was sure now. We dried off in the kitchen, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. I watched him move, the way his damp shirt clung to his shoulders, the way his hair fell into his eyes. "Why do you keep doing that?" I blurted, my voice rough. "Doing what?" he asked, but his smile said he knew exactly what I meant. "Pushing. Looking at me like that. You don't even know me." My words were sharper than I intended, but they came from a place I'd kept locked tight. Javier leaned against the counter, his expression softening. "I know enough. I know you show up every day, even when you don't want to. I know you're scared, but you're still here. That's enough for me, Miles." I didn't have a response. My whole life, I'd been taught to keep my guard up, to protect myself from a world that didn't always make room for people like me. But Javier wasn't the world. He was just him, and that scared me more than anything. The next morning, the sun was back, glinting off the wet grass like it was trying to apologize. We returned to the shed, the air still heavy with the memory of the rain. Javier was quieter, giving me space, but I felt his eyes on me as I hammered nails with more force than necessary. I was angry, not at him but at myself, at the part of me that wanted to lean into him and the part that wanted to run. By midday, we were framing the shed's walls, the structure starting to look like something real. Javier's uncle stopped by, his gruff voice breaking the tension. "You boys are doing good work," he said, inspecting the beams. "This shed's gonna outlast me." He clapped Javier on the shoulder, then nodded at me, his eyes lingering like he saw more than I wanted him to. After he left, Javier turned to me. "He likes you," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Says you've got steady hands." "Yeah, well, steady hands don't mean a steady heart," I muttered, turning back to the wood. Javier didn't push, but I could feel the weight of his silence. That afternoon, we hit a snag. One of the beams was warped, refusing to align. I cursed under my breath, my frustration boiling over. Javier knelt beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "We'll figure it out," he said, calm as ever. "Together." His hand rested on the beam, inches from mine, and I felt that spark again, the one I couldn't ignore. "Javier," I started, my voice low, "what are we doing here?" I wasn't talking about the shed anymore. He looked at me, his eyes steady but soft, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. "Building something," he said simply. "Something that matters." I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't that easy, that I wasn't ready to be seen. Not by him, not by anyone. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I picked up the hammer and went back to work, the rhythm of it grounding me. Javier stayed close, his presence a quiet promise that he wasn't going anywhere. That night I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about his words, about the shed, about the way his hand felt on mine. I was tired of running, but I didn't know how to stop. When I showed up the next morning, Javier was already there, sanding a plank with steady, deliberate strokes. He looked up, his smile hesitant but warm. "You came back," he said, like it was a question. "Didn't have anywhere else to go," I lied. He laughed, and for the first time I let myself smile back. The shed was starting to look like a shed now, its frame solid, its walls rising like a promise kept. But every nail I drove felt like I was hammering at my own defenses. Javier was relentless. Not in a loud way, but in the quiet, steady way he showed up, day after day, like he was waiting for me to catch up. That morning, we were working on the roof, balancing on ladders under a sky so blue it felt like a lie. Javier was humming again, some old song his mom used to sing, he'd told me. I caught myself listening, my hands slowing on the shingles. "You're gonna fall if you keep daydreaming," he teased, tossing me a nail. I caught it, our eyes meeting for a second too long. "Focus on your own work," I shot back, but there was no heat in it. He grinned, and I felt that pull again, the one that made me want to step closer and run away at the same time. We worked through the morning, the rhythm of it familiar now. His hands passing me tools, our shoulders brushing as we moved. But there was a new tension, a question hanging between us that neither of us had voiced. I could feel it in the way he watched me, in the way I couldn't stop watching him back. At lunch, we sat on the grass, the shed casting a long shadow. Javier pulled out a sandwich and offered me half, his fingers grazing mine. "You ever gonna tell me what's going on in that head of yours?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. I took a bite, stalling. "Not much to tell," I said finally. "Just trying to get this shed done." He raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." He leaned back, his hands behind his head, staring at the sky. "I came out when I was 17. My family, they didn't take it well. Took years to rebuild that bridge. But I don't regret it. Hiding who you are, it's like building a shed with no foundation. It'll fall eventually." I stared at my sandwich, his words sinking in. I wanted to tell him I wasn't like him, that I didn't have the courage to be that open. But the truth was, I was tired of hiding. Tired of pretending I didn't feel something every time he looked at me. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life keeping this part of me locked up. It's not easy." Javier sat up, his eyes soft but fierce. "It's not supposed to be easy, but it's worth it. You're worth it, Miles." I looked away, my throat tight. He didn't push, just sat there, his presence steady as the shed we were building. For the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like to stop running, to let him in. That afternoon, we were finishing the roof when Javier's uncle showed up again, his face darker than usual. "Got a call from the neighbor," he said, his voice gruff. "Says you two are getting cozy. That true?" My stomach dropped. Javier stiffened beside me, but his voice was calm. "We're just working, Tio. You know that." Mr. Morales looked between us, his eyes narrowing. "This shed's for my wife's memory. Don't make it something it's not." He walked away, leaving a silence heavier than the beams we'd been hauling. Javier cursed under his breath, his hands clenched. "He doesn't get it," he said, more to himself than to me. He thinks love's only one way. I wanted to say something to tell him it was okay, but the words stuck. Instead, I picked up a shingle and handed it to him. Let's just finish this, I said, my voice rough. He nodded, but the spark in his eyes was dimmer now. That night, I couldn't shake the image of Mr. Morales's face, the judgment in his eyes. I'd seen that look before on my dad, on my friends, on myself in the mirror. It was the look that kept me in the shadows. But Javier's words kept echoing too. You're worth it. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I wanted to. The next morning, Javier was quieter, his usual ease replaced by something heavier. We worked side by side, but the air felt different, like we were both waiting for something to break. When he reached for a nail and his hand brushed mine, I didn't pull away. He noticed, his eyes flicking to mine, a question in them. Miles, he said softly, you don't have to decide anything today, but I'm here, okay? I nodded, my heart pounding. For the first time, I didn't want to run. The shed was nearly done, its walls sturdy, its roof tight against the sky. But the closer we got to finishing, the more I felt like I was unraveling. Javier's words, his touch, his quiet courage, they were pulling at threads I'd spent years tying down. That morning, we were painting the shed, the sharp smell of primer cutting through the summer air. Javier was on a ladder, his brush moving in steady strokes, but his eyes kept finding mine. You're quiet today, he said, dipping his brush. More than usual. I shrugged, focusing on my own section of the wall. Just thinking. The truth was, I was drowning in thoughts. About him, about me, about what it meant to let someone see you, really see you. He climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. You want to talk about it? He asked, his voice gentle but firm, like he wasn't letting me off the hook this time. I set my brush down, my hands shaking. What if I can't do this, Javier? What if I'm not like you? The words felt like glass in my throat, sharp and fragile. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. You don't have to be like me. You just have to be you, whoever that is. I wanted to believe him, but fear was a heavy anchor. I'd spent so long hiding, convincing myself it was safer that way. But standing there, with Javier looking at me like I was enough, I felt the anchor start to lift. That afternoon, we were finishing the paint when Mr. Morales showed up again, his face a storm cloud. Neighbors talking again, he said, his voice low and hard. Says he saw you two holding hands. He spat the words like they burned. Javier's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. Tio, we're building your shed. That's what you asked for. Anything else is none of your business. Mr. Morales's eyes flicked to me, sharp and searching. You got anything to say, Miles? I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. Every instinct told me to deny it, to play it safe, to keep the walls up. But then I looked at Javier. His shoulders squared, his eyes fierce with something that looked like hope, and I couldn't do it. Yeah, I said, my voice unsteady but clear. I'm here for Javier, not just the shed. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Morales's face hardened, and for a moment, I thought he'd explode. But he just turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the grass. Javier let out a shaky breath, his hand finding mine, squeezing tight. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice thick. Yeah, I did, I said, and for the first time I meant it. We finished painting in silence, the weight of what I'd said settling between us. When we stepped back to admire the shed, its fresh coat gleaming in the sun, Javier bumped his shoulder against mine. Looks good, he said, but his eyes were on me, not the shed. That night we sat on the porch, the air cool and quiet. Javier's knee was pressed against mine, a small rebellion against the world. "You scared?" he asked, his voice soft. "Terrified," I admitted, "but not as much as I thought." He smiled, his hand finding mine again, and this time, I didn't pull away. The shed stood in the distance, a testament to what we'd built together. Not just wood and nails, but something stronger, something real. The next day, we were putting on the final touches, hanging the door, securing the hinges. Javier was quieter, but his smiles came easier, like he was carrying less weight. I felt it too, a lightness I hadn't known was possible. But when Mr. Morales showed up, his face still hard, I knew we weren't done fighting. "I don't understand you, Javier," he said, his voice low. This isn't what I raised you for." Javier's eyes flashed, but his voice stayed steady. "You raised me to be honest, Tio. That's what I'm doing." Mr. Morales looked at me, then back at Javier, and for a moment, I saw something soften in his eyes. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. As we finished the shed, Javier reached for my hand, his fingers threading through mine. "We did good," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Yeah," I said, squeezing his hand. "We did." The shed was done, its door swinging smooth on new hinges, its paint catching the light like it was proud of itself. But standing there with Javier, our hands still tangled from the day before, I knew the real work had just begun. The world didn't stop turning because we'd built something beautiful. That morning, we cleaned up the yard, stacking leftover wood and sweeping sawdust. Javier was quiet, his eyes distant, like he was bracing for something. "You okay?" I asked, tossing a scrap into the pile. He nodded, but it wasn't convincing. "Tio's coming by later, wants to talk." His voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of worry. I wanted to say something reassuring, but my own nerves were raw. Coming out to Mr. Morales yesterday had been like jumping off a cliff. I was still falling, waiting to see where I'd land. Instead, I bumped my shoulder against Javier's, a small gesture that felt bigger than words. He smiled, faint but real, and we went back to work. By noon, the yard was spotless, the shed standing proud in the sunlight. We sat under the oak tree, the same one that had sheltered us from the rain days ago. Javier's hand found mine, his thumb tracing familiar circles. "Whatever happens with T.O., he said, "this, you and me, it's worth it." I swallowed hard, my heart too full to speak. I'd spent so long hiding, convinced I'd lose everything if I let myself be seen. But Javier had shown me something different, something worth fighting for. When Mr. Morales arrived, his face was unreadable, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked at the shed, then at us, his eyes lingering on our joined hands. "You boys did good," he said finally, his voice gruff but softer than before. "Better than I expected." Javier stood, his grip on my hand tightening. "It's not just about the shed, Tio. You know that." Mr. Morales sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know. I don't understand it, Javier. I won't lie, but I see how you look at him, how he looks at you. Reminds me of how I looked at your aunt." His voice cracked, and he looked away, his eyes shining. "She'd want you to be happy. Both of you." I felt a lump in my throat, the weight of his words settling deep. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start, a bridge we could build on. Javier's eyes were wet, but he smiled, squeezing my hand. "Thanks, Tio," he said, his voice thick. Mr. Morales nodded, then turned to the shed, running a hand along its frame. "She'd like this," he said softly, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the wood. That night, Javier and I sat on the porch again, the stars bright above us. The shed stood in the distance, a quiet testament to what we'd built, not just with our hands, but with our hearts. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Javier leaned his head against mine, his breath warm against my cheek. "We keep building," he said, "together." The days that followed were a blur of small victories and quiet moments. I went back to Oakland, but Javier came with me, his laughter filling my tiny apartment. We talked about the future, about moving in together, about facing the world side by side. It wasn't easy. My family wasn't like Javier's. My dad's silence when I told him about us was louder than any argument. But every time I faltered, Javier was there, his hand in mine, his eyes steady. Months later, we went back to the shed for Mr. Morales's birthday. He'd turned it into a workshop, filled with tools and memories of his wife. He greeted us with a gruff nod, but there was a warmth in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "You boys staying for dinner?" he asked, and we said yes. As we sat around the table, Javier's hand resting on my knee under the cloth, I realized something. Love wasn't just the spark between us, or the shed we'd built. It was the courage to keep going, to show up, to be seen. I'd spent years tied up in fear, but Javier had reached for something I never expected. My heart, my truth, my future. And I wasn't running anymore.